All right. I'm so glad to be back from vacation and really actually get some things done. I love doing these podcasts most of all. Got one story in this podcast. Then we have another segment from Neoma and I's discussion with the Creek Devil crew, Tom and Will with the Creek Devil podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed that. But here's this first story. It's written by Mark, and he writes, in March of 2019, I left my house in suburban Philadelphia for a 5-day solo camping trip in north central Pennsylvania. I set up camp in the most remote wilderness area of the whole state. At one point, while I was away from camp for the whole day, something with a huge four-toed human-looking bare foot came into my camp, unstaked my tent, ate some of my food, and left footprints all over the snow. I think it was two creatures. Some of the footprints were smaller than the others. This changed my life. I became obsessed with everything Bigfoot. I began researching Sasquatch and listening to every encounter story I could, and I still do. A few weeks ago, I had a realization. I had a close encounter in 2014, but at the time, due to my ignorance, I just told myself it was something else. Until my recent obsession, I knew very little about Bigfoot. I was under the impression they were way out in the northwest U.S. and Canada. That is, if they were even real at all. Once I dove into the topic, I realized that people had run into them in all corners of the country and indeed the world. Today, my life is just about perfect. I have a new wife, a new house, and 2 new baby girls. I retired 3 years ago at the age of 39, and I'm now a stay-at-home father who is living the dream. In November of 2014, this was not the case. Back then, everything in my life fell apart all at once. I lost my job, I lost my place to live, and my vehicle all in a matter of 1 week. The one thing I did have was a full set of camping gear. I went to the woods on the edge of a town in southern New Jersey and set up a stealth camping site to sleep in at night. In the morning, I would make the short walk into town. I'd meet my girlfriend and take her to work so I could use her car to job hunt. I would also look for a vehicle and go to the gym to shower and shave. Southern New Jersey is home to a 1 million acre wilderness known as the Pine Barrens. It's full of deer and coyotes and turkey and plant life that isn't found anywhere else. My little camp was right on the edge of it, and I was next to a brand new housing addition that was still being developed. I picked a spot off the path through the woods that the locals use to walk their dogs and in warmer months ride their off-road vehicles. I found a place that was very well hidden so anyone could easily walk in within a few yards of my tent and not see that I was there. This was aided by a huge mound between the path and my camping spot. I covered the tent with a camo tarp and surrounded the area with piles of brush. When I was inside the tent looking out, I had the path behind me, a few homes maybe a quarter of a mile straight ahead, and the new development another quarter mile away to my left and thousands of acres of the Pine Barrens wilderness to my right. The nights were cold and a pack of coyotes would gather right outside the front of my tent every night about 8:30 p.m. It was like clockwork. They would fight and howl and run around doing God knows what for a few hours before finally heading into the deep woods. They didn't seem to be afraid of me being there, and they never gave me any trouble. Even so, I slept with a 26-inch full-tang short sword in my hand just to be safe. By day 5, I had set up a new job that started in a few weeks and had bought a 1996 Ford Explorer that I planned to pick up the next day when my new insurance was active. I had gotten to my tent that night just as the sun was going down around 5:30 p.m. It was going to be cold, so I put on some warm clothes. Then I ate some snacks and puffed on my vape before settling in for the night. It was about 8 p.m. and the coyotes showed up and they were raising hell. They were making so much racket that they stirred up the neighborhood dogs who were barking like crazy off in the distance. All at once they went from super noisy to running off. I could hear them whining and yelping as they ran off to my right into the deep woods. Well, I was laying on my back ready to fall asleep when an unbelievably powerful stench filled my tent. It was a really bad mixture of unpleasant aromas. It was a combination of nasty body odor, feces, skunk, and most of all, smelly feet. You guys, that is one of the things about these emails, are the way you guys describe the way these things smell. It just cracks me up. I don't know. I digress. I'm sorry. I sat up in my tent and I thought, what the hell? I was confused. I cannot overemphasize the absolute power of the stench. It was so overwhelming that I could barely stand it. I tried breathing through my mouth, and that was even worse. It was so strong I could taste it on the tip of my tongue. After 20 seconds or so, I decided I need to open the tent and get out of there and hopefully escape this smell. As I was unzipping the tent, I heard someone coming down the path, and then they slowly walked off into the woods to my left. It was the unmistakable sound of a person cautiously walking through the woods. I quietly zipped up the tent, and I sat there, frozen. My heart was pounding, and I thought it was the police or maybe some local homeowner coming to give me some crap. I had made the entire week unnoticed, and now someone was going to cause trouble. Life was hard enough at the time, and it was the last thing I needed. The footsteps came closer. They rounded the mound that was hiding my tent, but were still 20 feet away. Then they made their way to where the coyotes had been, just a few yards in front of my tent, and it stopped. I was as still as a statue. It was breathing deep and hoarse like a man catching his breath. Then the footsteps came right up to the very front of the tent. The tarp I had covering the tent made it impossible for me to see anything, but whoever this was, they were right there and breathing. The footsteps then continued around to the right side and then stopped again. Then it leaned its face right up to the tarp and started trying to smell what was inside. I could hear the big long sniffs, each followed by an exhale through the mouth. At this point, I wasn't so sure it was a person anymore. No man has a lung capacity that powerful. And besides, why would a person be sniffing my tent? As unlikely as it seemed, I thought it might be a bear. They're very rare in the pine barrens, and I was sure it had walked on 2 feet. But what else could it be, right? At this point, I decided to say something. If it was a black bear, there was a 99% chance it would run for its life as soon as it heard a human voice. "Who's there?" I said, loudly, emphasizing my words with a smack on the right side of the tent with the back of my hand. It took 2 steps back and let out a long, deep, terrifying growl. My blood ran cold. I gripped my blade and poised for some sort of an attack. But to my amazement, it simply walked off in the forest. I could hear its 2-legged footsteps crunching through the leaves, getting farther and farther away until it was gone. I started to breathe again as the putrid stench began to fade, and after about a minute, I heard the loud snap of a branch breaking, followed by the sound of wood hitting wood twice. I sat there catching my breath and wondering if it was a monster or a bear. Nothing made sense. Black bears don't have a strong odor, even during their mating season. I'm also certain a black bear would have run the second I opened my mouth. Sasquatch never crossed my mind. If they existed at all, I was sure it was in some far-off location, certainly not on the edge of a town in New Jersey. Once the adrenaline wore off, I was exhausted. I don't know how, but I remember sleeping well that night. The next morning, I packed everything up and got the hell out of there. A few months later, I had gotten my life squared away and had all but forgotten that night, having attributed the entire event to an encounter with a bear. Of course, now I'm pretty sure I know exactly what it was. Oh man, I don't even know. I'm just zeroing in on this thing pressing its face against the tent. I mean, just imagine, I've tent camped before. I hate tent camping, by the way. It's real uncomfortable, and I'm too fat and old now to crawl in and out of a tent. We bought a camper, so I get to lay in an actual bed. But laying in a tent, you hear wildlife around you. I mean, it's just the tent fabric between you and whatever's going on outside. Most of the times it's raccoons. They'll come in and dig through your trash or whatever. And we used to always stick our heads out and watch them, And if they're habituated, you can't run them off. Raccoons won't run off. They'll just stay. Matter of fact, if you try to run them off, they'll kind of get after you and they'll back you down. But to have something that big walk up to your tent and press on the tent, you can hear it sniffing. It's got a huge lung capacity. I don't know how I could even not have a heart attack. I mean, that's just scary. These stories are so good. This was great. I love all of your stories, and this is one of them. I really appreciate the man sending it, and we've got more to come. How about we jump over into the Creek Devil interview? I think you guys will like this. Neoma asked some great questions. Let's jump into it now.
A few years ago, I had the opportunity to talk with John Bindernagel, obviously before he died, was with the Ouija board. And when in our conversation, I asked him what the most convincing evidence he felt was in support of the existence of Bigfoot, and he cited footprints. I can't argue with him, especially those prints that show dermal ridges, but I do have a question about the fact that some of the plaster casts I've seen are squared off toes, some have an offset big toe. Mm-hmm. In the South, they only have 3 toes. What is that about? Why are there so many different foot formations?
I have to tell you, I'm not real sure about this 3-toed stuff. In fact, even in the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek, where they incorrectly stated in one point there was some tracks that were 3-toed, I know somebody who was actually there and helped film that, and he said the tracks are actually 5-toed prints. Most of the time they're 5-toed. Now, what you're seeing in some of there's going to be 2 things going on. There are variation within the species. So like with humans, no 2 are identical. You know what I mean? So, and a good example is that if you've ever tried to wear somebody else's shoes, how uncomfortable they feel. Mm-hmm. Because their feet are slightly different shaped and wear differently. Then there are some subcategories of creatures, and what I was told by a source that I can't reveal, that there were 2 main groupings, and for the sake of conversation, we'll call them Group A and Group B. And then there were 2 subgroupings in each one of those. So you're going to get some variations. And it makes sense. If you got a breeding population over a large region, let's say the United States and Canada, there are geographical barriers to keep one regional group from interbreeding with another one. So over time in evolution, there are some different changes that occur. So, and you see it with other animal species.
So, that leads to another question then. So you're saying there are roughly 4 subspecies of Bigfoot?
4 groupings, yeah.
Okay. And what are those? I mean, is there a name for them?
Well, I call them, and people have sort of latched onto it since then. I call the 2 groups in species. Group A would be the type 1 and type 4. The type 1 is what you see in the Patterson film. And the type 4 is more like what you would see in pictures with the Minnesota Iceman. And why they're in that category is based on their teeth primarily. The teeth have no canines. They're blocky, similar to ours. Mm-hmm. But there's some size differences and some other configurations that are different between those 2 groupings. Then the other side of the house, let's say the A, this is the A grouping and the B grouping, which predominantly in the South, and the type 2, they have very prominent canines. They look a lot like the ones you see in the Patterson film, but they're more often, or as often as they are bipedally, they're moving on all 4s, and you'll see them more in groupings. And then there's the other one that has actually kind of a baboon face, almost a snout. Mm-hmm. And that one resides primarily along the Mississippi River drainage basin. That's a type 3.
Is that the one that they do? Some people call it a gugwe or a gugway?
Probably, yes.
Wow.
Are you familiar? That's a new term to me. I have no idea what that is, to be honest with you. I mean, I honestly, I've seen some researchers group it with dogmen and others research it, or I'm sorry, not research it, group it with Bigfoot. And I have no idea. Other than I'm told it's pretty vicious.
That's the creature everybody writes the fictional books about.
Right.
Because I think Gagwe means face eater, right? But that's a Algonquian term, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you can take a creature and make him mean, and you have to kill him, and he's the villain, that's always a big seller. So,
It is.
Okay, I hope you all enjoyed that podcast. You know, there's a few nasty comments on the last video we did regarding our guest on this show, and I would appreciate it if you guys have feelings about some of these people that we have on, if you would just keep it to yourself. It's really rude. It's not very gracious at all, and that's not what this channel is about. We're not here to do battle and do the high school wars between Bigfoot researchers and all that crap. We're above that, and I would appreciate the people who seem to feel the need to express some kind of nasty or negative comment about our guests, and I don't care who it is. I don't care who we have on. That this audience and myself and Neoma would be gracious to people and appreciate the fact that they spent the time to speak with us. I consider it an honor that Will Jevning and Tom would take time to speak with us and share some information with you. There's a lot of information out there about Bigfoot, but none of it is verified. None of it is verified. This Gina, I mean, everybody can argue from one end of the spectrum to the other. And you learn more if you listen. If you just listen and be quiet and listen, you'll learn. You'll gather tons of information, and you can make your own determination who you like without being ugly to the person who's sharing the information. Will Jevning seems to be a very stable, sober man. He has thought this stuff out quite thoroughly through the years and has a vast experience in the field. There are other people who study this topic who disagree with him, and I may not agree with everything. Just because I listen to a man or have something on my podcast does not necessarily mean I agree or disagree with them, but I love hearing people's viewpoints, and sometimes they're crazy wild, and sometimes they're really based in logic, and that's why I wanted to have Will and Tom on to discuss these things, and we're going to keep doing this. And you're not going to run them off. I mean, these guys have spent a lot of time. We're just listeners. We're not the researchers. We're not the people who are studying the topic. We're the listeners. So let's take in what we can. I appreciate you guys listening to the podcast, and I would appreciate the comments. If they're not going to be nice, just don't say anything at all. I would really appreciate that. All right, I hope you guys have a good one. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks.